a real fast bracket, just come to the rebooting of the Max Light Rail project. So Premier Barnett from WA was in press last week suggesting that he'd made a bid or a pitch to get $500 million that was on the table back for Perth Light Rail. Has there been a formal approach, or was that just kind of diplomacy via media? I was not at all clear.
I'm not. We're not aware of any formal approach, Senator. No, we're not.
Anybody at all?
No, we're not aware.
The Premier can go to the media and say, I've approached the Commonwealth for $500 million, but none of you are aware of approach actually having been made.
We haven't received anything further on it, Senator.
That's extraordinarily deceptive. All right, thank you for your advice. In order that I don't go out and verbal the Premier of the state of WA, could you
Senator,
just check your records and just take
to
that on notice?
We'll check that because we have no record, but that's not to say there haven't been conversations with the Prime Minister or ministers. We can't comment on those.
That's right. It's an important project. I don't want to get in the way. If there are approaches being made, I'd just ask if you could take that on notice.
Certainly.
I appreciate that. As guided by the Chair, I'm going to set aside the politics of the freight link and I'll ask some general questions about how your procedures work. Senator Bullock put some to you earlier. Confirming things, so I think we'd confirm fairly satisfactorily that funds haven't departed the Commonwealth, haven't been transferred to the Western Australian Government.
That's correct.
That's correct. Okay, great. Maybe I'm traversing ground that was covered earlier, but I want to be absolutely clear in my mind. The project proposal report, which the state government had broken into two parts. So part one is this proposed row extension out to Stock Road, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, you've got the PPR for that. That's under assessment. How long do those assessment processes take from your point of view, just for that part one?
I might just ask Mr Pitter to respond to that.
They can vary, Senator, depending on the complexity, but typically a couple of months.
Oh, okay. When did you receive that part one?
I'll take a moment to check on that. I believe we received that in earlier this month.
Okay.
I'm just trying to. I do have that information with me. I'm sorry, I just can't find that information.
That's all right. We'll come back
I do
to that
believe it was earlier this month.
Yeah, if you get a date, just chuck it on the record a bit later in the session if you want.
Sure.
Again, to confirm some of the questions that were asked earlier, so the second PPR, does that take you all the way to the port gate or to the river? We've had a bit of back and forth in previous sessions in here about whether it takes, the Perth Freight Link actually connects with the port. What's your understanding of the second PPR? Will it get you to the southern bank of the Swan River or does it get you to the gate of the container terminal?
The reference design for stage two gets us to the river.
Yeah.
So we'd anticipate that the PPR we'll see for the second stage will get us to the river.
So presumably there will need to be a third PPR then, unless the state goes it alone, I guess, and doesn't come seeking Commonwealth funding to get you to the terminal. Is that a correct assumption?
At the moment, Freight Link comprises those two stages, which is the row 8 component and the second stage, which gets you to the Canning-Stirling Highway area before the river.
I might be drifting into hypotheticals here, but if the state came back seeking more than $100 million for that third stage across the river, then the process would assume a PPR would need to be produced, I guess, wouldn't it?
For any additional stages of the project, we would expect to see a project proposal report for any additional scope.
Okay. If the scope was either less than $100 million or if they didn't want any Commonwealth money, then they wouldn't need to come back at that. I think I understand the process. When you were assessing the benefits and the costs of the project, there's a big ambiguity in the costs because you don't know how they're getting across the river. I would have also assumed there's a big ambiguity in the benefits because you don't know how much traffic's going to be piled up until at the river, the sort of bottleneck at the end of the process, until the state government provides you with some answers on how they get into the port. So how did you calculate traffic time savings without knowing where the project goes?
Well, Senator, I think, again, as we covered quite extensively in Fremantle a week or 10 days ago, the benefits and costs for the project were very much based on the reference design that was outlined in the summary business case.
But the reference design doesn't get you to the port, so presumably the benefits you'd have had to calculate a hideous traffic pile-up because there's a bottleneck.
So it took into account the stage 1 and stage 2, and the benefits and costs were calculated on the basis of that reference design.
Okay.
And I think in terms of some of the questions that were asked of Infrastructure Australia at the time about how those benefits and costs were reviewed, took into account traffic modelling, and that traffic modelling was based on the project as was outlined in the reference case, as outlined in the business case, the reference design, which was a project that ran up to the river. And that was the project that delivered the benefits.
All right. One last thing on that subject before I move on, and again, just to confirm what I thought you've told us earlier in the day, that there will be no transfer of Commonwealth money until you have assessed and are happy with Stage 1 and Stage 2 PPR documents.
Decisions under the Act, under the legislation, are based on assessment of those project proposal reports, and money would then flow once there was satisfaction with those project proposal reports.
All right, I appreciate that. So just to recap, and then I'm going to move on. It'll take you a couple of months to assess Stage 1. You haven't received Stage 2 yet, so your clock can't start until that document's in your hands, and the state's still, I think, waiting to hear back from private engineering companies how they might save a bit of money getting up to the river. Then you would get a document requesting, or the PPR for Stage 2, another couple of months, and then you'd be in a position to make a final decision. Is that a reasonable summary?
Those sorts of broad timeframes, Senator.
Yeah, I'm not trying to pin you down. I just want to make sure that that's the kind of order that it happens in. And that you confirmed before, after a bit of encouragement from the Chair, I think Mr Murdoch, that if the BCR ratio falls low enough, or if there are other hold-ups at your end, the Commonwealth retains the right not to fund the project.
The Commonwealth always retains that right, but the Commonwealth has made a firm commitment to this project at this point in time.
I find that a bit of a contradiction. You made a firm commitment to it, but you're also waiting to see if it stacks up to decide whether to spend the money. What if it doesn't stack up?
Well, there'll be matters for further government consideration. Okay,
but the door's open. I'm not going to dwell or obsess about that, but I still think it's an important point. So your submission, page 18 of your submission, you've said that the project will receive the funding. If the project receives funding, you need to be satisfied that the project complies with the National Land Transport Act 2014. Could you just talk us through what that specifically means? What are the obligations that you're looking for when you're assessing compliance?
So, Senator, the legislation, and I apologise, I don't have a copy of the legislation in front of me, but it outlines that the sorts of things that a project should contribute to, solution of issues around freight, around connectivity, around a project that deals with land transport issues, those sorts of things. Okay. So the legislation's fairly outlines a list of a number of things, but as I say, I apologise, just don't have the legislation.
No, that's all right, and it's a bit remiss of me not to have it either. If you have time later in the session just to point me to the section in the Act that you'd be looking for, do you have to publish a statement of compliance against each of the objectives of the Act?
A public statement?
Yeah.
We don't need to do that, no, Senator.
Do you?
But they are in our advice to the Minister. We outline for the Minister's consideration how we believe a project complies with the relevant sections of the legislation. Okay.
I think most of the rest of my questions are probably better placed for Infrastructure Australia, so I've only got one or two more. 92% of the economic benefits are going to private vehicles, which begs the question for me is why it is being termed a freight link or a freight project. When you were,
if I may, Senator,
yeah,
I believe that relates to heavy freight. I think that and this was a question which you asked again at Fremantle. My understanding is that other freight vehicles also benefit in using that freight link.
Okay.
That proportion that you're talking about is specifically the heavy freight.
That'll be the tolled vehicles, so anything of a certain category that had the toll apply to it, but not delivery vans and that kind of stuff.
Not light delivery, and not potentially lorries or trucks of lesser than the heavy freight.
Okay, that's a good distinction. Do you know what proportion of the benefits are going, if you were going to disaggregate that out for me further, 8% being heavy freight that would be subjected to the toll, what proportion of the balance of the 92% would be lighter freight vehicles?
Look, Senator, I should have that, but I don't have that information. And that's something we need to look at in responding to one of your questions on notice.
Okay. Well, maybe if that work's being done, if you're able to do that, and it's probably a bit frustrating for you guys, if this material was in the public domain, I wouldn't have to quiz you about these kind of line items, but we're working a bit in the dark, unfortunately. So if you're able to disaggregate for us, and what I'm most interested in then, if there's three categories, heavy freight that's tolled, light freight that's not tolled, and then the balance presumably would be passenger traffic. I'm interested to know, as Senator Rice was on the East-West Link case, what are the modelled traffic time savings for each of those three categories or classes of vehicle when you were calculating the benefit?
Yeah.
Really interested in that. And my final question on this issue is obviously, how do you model and what assumptions do you use for the fact that in 5 years, when this thing's a colossal traffic jam as everywhere else is, then those travel time benefits have evaporated? Do you model congestion rising and then eventually swamping the benefits that supposedly justify the project in the first place? How do you do that?
The project's been modelled over sort of 30-year timeframes based on projected traffic growth and so on. So the expectation is that the benefits of the project would be of long-term duration.
Okay, that didn't quite answer my question. Do you incorporate, when you're calculating these things, rising traffic congestion that gradually eats away at and eventually eliminates the travel time savings?
We do, Senator, and we also look at the base or the do nothing case as well, which also has models in congestion. So you're comparing it against not having the project versus having the project.
Good.
And so the congestion obviously does increase on the new project over time. That's the case with every project as growth occurs. So we do have some details. We might see if we can take that on notice and get
that's what I was anticipating. The last thing on this for me would be, what would it take and who would you need to be referred to, or could you do this on your own motion? I feel we're being a bit ripped off here actually as taxpayers, that you can compare the Perth Freight Link as submitted to you by the state government with the do nothing case, but the state hasn't provided you with the alternative that's staring everyone in the face, which was referred to by other senators earlier in the day, as just do it properly and create an overflow container terminal in Coburn Sound and dedicated road and rail links to that. If we could have those three options being compared, don't do anything, do the freight link through Leach Highway, or do the outer harbour option, then we would actually have some basis for comparison as what's value for money. Are you able to do that on your own motion, or do you actually need a referral to come to you from somebody competent so that you can actually work the numbers on that option?
Well, principally the first stage is it's a matter of evaluation by the West Australian Government and the project proponents. That's the first stage.
Sorry, I didn't understand that.
Well, sorry, the first party who would need to do that assessment is the strategic assessment would be the West Australian Government.
But for example, it's not only... Yeah, shoot, Chair.
Done, so just as guidance.
All right, this is my last one. I know I've been saying this is my last one for a while, but this is my last one. It's not simply up to state governments to refer things to you guys, is it? If a consortium, for example, of industry, local government and others were to put a counter-proposal, would you be able to assess that against the kind of benchmarks that you're setting the freight link against? Or would it have to come from the state government?
Well, we could certainly review alternate proposals, but often we are dependent on data from the state governments in relation to traffic and projections and freight and those sorts of things. So we will do what we can, but often we are dependent on data which has to be provided by state or territory governments.
Okay. All right. Yeah, you've taken some info and notice for us. I appreciate that. We'll come back a bit later. Thanks, Chair.